Welcome. Thanks for turning out. It's a really nice thing to talk about birds and building a bird habitat. We've all been stressed by COVID and the elections and a whole host of other things. And sometimes it's really nice to just take a step back and think about things that are interesting and enjoyable. So I'm going to share my screen if I can. I usually have a problem doing that, but I will do it now. I think that's going to do it right there. Okay. Can everybody see that? Okay. I'm gonna present a view. All right, so I'm going to talk about backyard birds and bird habitats. Linda has a digital handout that will deal with some of the more detailed things like the kinds of plants and what they might be used for, the kinds of foods that birds might be interested in and stuff like that. So you won't have to take notes on those. But this is my backyard. You can see in the background the olive trees, and in this particular picture, they had just been sprayed for olive fruit fly, so they look kind of blue. We spray with clay, and that keeps the fruit flies away, we hope. So we moved to Marin about 7 years ago. And when we moved to Marin, none of this except for the native oaks and the olive trees were there. So we built most of it. And this is our ninth house and our 11th move. And so it's also our third time we've lived in California. And so this time, but it's the first time we lived in Northern California. And so I was really interested in the trees and in the shrubs and so on that I could grow here that I couldn't grow in Southern California, Orange County, where we lived before. So let me just go ahead. All right. So I guess that you like birds because otherwise you wouldn't be here. And this is an acorn woodpecker, and she's doing what acorn woodpeckers do in the fall, and that is gathering acorns and putting them in these holes, which is in a granary tree right next to my home. They're also making noises, and you might hear some tapping because they're also trying to turn my home into a granary tree, and they're doing a very good job of it, actually, it turns out, much to my dismay. So they're gathering their food for the winter and next year. They stow it in these holes, much to the dismay of PG&E and the telephone company. That's the reason why people in California, why utilities in California have concrete telephone poles and power poles because the acorn woodpeckers can't get at it. So if you'd like to see these birds, then where you can see them and in more is in a bird habitat. A habitat has to do with everything that surrounds the animals and the people who live in them. But first, I got to do a word from our sponsor. And we Marin Master Gardeners are volunteers. Most of us have loved gardening for most of our adult lives. We're part of the UC Cooperative Extension, and our mission is to provide research-based horticultural information on horticulture, pest management, and sustainable practices in gardening to homeowners. And our website, which is on here, www.marinmg.ucanr.edu, is an excellent source of a lot of information, and I encourage you to use it. Also, just like the libraries, our office is closed, so our help desk is a remote help desk. And if you send an email with a question to helpdesk@marinmg.org, you'll get an answer. And if you happen to do it on a Thursday afternoon, you might even get an answer from me. So let's start by figuring out what is a habitat. I have to say that the definition that follows is not mine. The definition that follows, which is, a habitat is where birds find what they need: food, water, and cover. And that was given to me in a 4th grade class in Spencerport, New York Elementary School by about, I would guess, a 10th or 11th year old boy, when I asked the question to the class, so what do you think a habitat is? And he stood up, and those are his exact words. And I thought that was the best definition of a habitat I had ever seen. And after the class, I said to him, do I have your permission to steal this, because I'm going to use it in every presentation I give on habitats. So a habitat is really a place where wildlife, plants, insects, birds, mammals, and people find what they need to sustain life. It's the infrastructure for shelter, reproduction, and protection of these insects and animals. It's got the appropriate soils, topography, and climate for them and for the plants around them. And it's got sources of soil nutrients and food, including plants, for the wildlife. And most important, in our dry climate, it's got sources of water. But we'll talk a little bit more about that. So if you want to see birds, what you want to do is, the first principle is create a bird-friendly habitat and keep your cats indoors. Invariably, when I give this kind of a presentation, I get somebody commenting, well, but my cat doesn't bother birds or other animals. And my answer to that is that you don't have a cat, because cats have been doing that for millions of years. And so I don't know what you have, but you don't have a cat. But the thing that's important to understand about keeping your cats indoors is that it's not only good for the birds, it's also good for the cats. According to the American Veterinary Medical Association, indoor cats are healthier, longer lived, and keeping them inside can minimize the risks to these cats and to wildlife, humans, and the environment. Free roaming cats may have a reduced lifespan and be exposed to injury, suffering, and death from vehicles, attacks from other animals, euthanasia, human cruelty, poisons, traps, and weather extremes. And the thing of it is the natural hunting behavior of free roaming cats results in wildlife species being pursued. The American Birding Association estimates that more than 2 billion birds a year are killed by free roaming domestic cats and feral cats. And that's a significant number, because the populations of birds in North America are under a lot of other different stressors. And really, that's a significant loss to the population. So please, keep them indoors, better for the cats, better for the birds. And this is a neighbor of mine, actually. He lives in my backyard. We'll see where he lives a little bit later in this. And he's got in his mouth the caterpillar of the white-lined sphinx moth. For those of you who are interested, it's Hylias lineata. And he and his mate need to find about 300 of these caterpillars per day to feed their nestlings. And they need to do that for 12 days or more. That's a lot of caterpillars and a lot of other insects. But there's a problem. And the problem is that these guys, the butterflies and moths, are the people or the beings that produce those caterpillars. And unfortunately, there are also fewer and fewer of these. And without these, there'll be fewer and fewer of caterpillars, and then fewer and fewer birds and other wildlife. And so what we need to do is we need to encourage the moths and the butterflies and other pollinators to produce the kinds of things that birds and other wildlife can use to live in their habitat. And the thing of it is it all begins with the plants. And the plants are what turns the sunlight that we get into food that other beings can use. And so in order to see birds and other wildlife and to enjoy where you live, what we're asking you to do is to build and sustain healthy habitat gardens. Gardens that are in sync with the environment around them, that are the right plants in the right place, that are well maintained and get appropriate irrigation, so the gardens are healthy, and the beings, including the human beings that use them, are enjoying them. And particularly, we'd like you to consider using California natives in these gardens. They will help you build biodiversity, and they are more ecologically sustainable. And the value of using natives is that they go a long way to building garden health and resiliency. They are in sync with marine environments. They build biodiversity because they're visited and used more heavily by wildlife. And in terms of butterflies and moths, they are required because the butterflies and moths cannot reproduce and lay their eggs and produce caterpillars on exotic plants because the caterpillars don't recognize exotic plants as food. So they improve garden sustainability. And the reason why is because they all co-evolved together. The plants co-evolved with the Mediterranean climate, the geography, the topography, the soil, and all around them. And they're the instruments of growth. They turn the energy of the sun in something that can be used by insects, birds, animals, and people. Something like those caterpillars that you saw my papa friend, who is my neighbor, caring for their young. In fact, habitat garden plants provide the food and cover for everything else in that habitat. And native plants are heavily preferred. And the reason is simple. They grew up together for millions of years. And they are used more heavily, 3 to 10 times more heavily than other plants. So we really would like to see you consider using some native plants in whatever habitat you build. In a habitat garden, you plant for food and cover. Native plants, as I said, are preferred. Non-native plants, particularly Mediterranean climate plants, to fill in. But please, no non-native invasives. And when you think about a habitat, please understand that things use your habitat year-round. So plant for all the seasons. And that's really important. You need a succession of flowering and growth. So this is what my garden looks like. This is what my habitat looks like. In the back, let's see if I can make this work. I want to lace a pointer. In the back are the olive trees that we actually just pressed and got 4 gallons of oil out of. And then this is mostly ornamental garden. And this is what a good habitat should look like. Habitat gardens are not neat and tidy. And that's because habitats aren't neat and tidy. And so you need to have places where things can hide. You need to have places where things can find food, and you need to have places where they can have their young. So places like this, and like this, and like this, and like this. This is a small habitat garden. It's about 12 to 15 by 20 feet in size. And it's in bloom most of the year round. And it's usually, particularly in spring and summer, loaded with pollinators and butterflies. And so these are the kinds of things that you think about when you think about a habitat. And habitat gardens have natural foods in them. Here we see some of these natural foods. Berry plants in the toyon and Rogers red grapes, small berries in wax myrtle, seeds and pollen and nectar in coyote bush and in manzanita, nectar. And ceanothus are amazing plants because they not only provide food for butterflies and other pollinators, but they are a host plant for about 5 species of native butterflies. So these food plants, berries and small fruits, acorns and nuts, seeds, nectar, manzanita, toyon, coffee berry, currants, gooseberry, lemonade berries, brambles, holly, cherry, and so on. And for the seed eaters, ornamental and unmowed grasses, thistles, and flowers like our native asters, native coreopsis, native sunflowers, native verbena, and so on. And this is what's in your handout, so you really don't need to write all of that stuff down. We also have these plants, which produce nectar, pollen, and seeds, but are also host plants for butterflies and other pollinators. In the upper left here are ceanothus. This is the native Fremontia. That is a really interesting plant because it provides seeds and cover for quail and other birds. Here we have here and here salvia for butterflies and hummingbirds and so on. And here are more. These are particularly nectar plants. These are just going to sleep now. These are California fuchsia. And in my garden, they are just going to sleep. They usually grow or bloom from mid-August almost to Thanksgiving. Over here, we have salvia, and we have here California buckwheat, which is a great nectar and pollen plant, but is also a host plant for butterflies and moths for about 6 to 10 species. This is coyote mint, Mondalarda villosa, and it is a great plant for bees, mainly also for our native honeybee, bumblebees. And over here is the native clematis, chaparral clematis, and it is a great plant. Its seed pods attract insects that other seed pods don't. Now we have plants for cover. And many of these plants are food plants, but they are also cover plants. Things live under all of these plants. Things like our western fence lizards, other insects, and small animals, which are important to the ecosystem in the area. These are all, these pictures were taken in the spring before these guys really spread. But even in the winter, they provide good cover. And if you want cover, here it is. This is a large ground cover of coyote bush, Twin Peaks, and Pigeon Point. It's Pigeon Point and Twin Peaks are dwarf coyote bush. They basically grow about 2 feet tall, but each plant spreads about 8 to 10 feet. And this is a very important area in my garden. And not the least of which is because under it lives this guy. And under this, it continues to be a sheltered nesting or refuge resource for 2 to 3 families of California quail, Californian spotted towhees, white and golden crowned sparrows, fox sparrow, thrushes, hermit thrush, and Samoan's thrush, and other pollinators and butterflies. When it's in bloom, and it blooms in the fall, late summer to fall, but when it's in bloom, it has in the past attracted hordes of butterflies and other pollinators. And sadly, there seems to be an insect apocalypse here in North Novato. In the fall of 2016, this planting attracted hundreds of butterflies and beneficial insects, 5 species of skippers, Mylata crescent, Ackman blue, common buckeye, cabbage white, California ringlet, and more, and what appeared to be hordes of teeny wasps and hoverflies, and lots and lots and lots of bumblebees. This year, there were none. And I mean none. Where on one afternoon, I counted at least 100 common buckeye alone. This year, I saw 2, and that was it. And I really do not know what happened. Thankfully, this guy has got underneath him his mate and about 15 little guys that are in the nest just about where he is standing. And he's standing there on guard, taking care of them. And we do get quail, and we get a lot of different birds nesting here. In fact, this year we probably had about 20 to 25 species of birds nesting in this habitat garden. And that's an important thing because that helps sustain the populations of birds. So if you want to talk about native plants, here is the one that is probably the most valuable of them all for food, for cover, and nestings. Hundreds of wildlife species use these trees. These are valley oak trees, but our native oaks are really tremendously important to building or sustaining habitats. Owls, raptors, and hole nesters use it. It's multiple food sources, and it's also an important butterfly and moth host. We think we've counted 300 wildlife species, birds, mammals, and reptiles that use oak trees. 5,000 insect species, including 7 butterflies use it as a host plant. Acorns feed woodpeckers, jays, and squirrels. And the woodpeckers, jays, and squirrels are running around this property like crazy, stashing acorns wherever they can. Hole nesters in these trees include chickadees, titmice, nuthatches, woodpeckers, bluebirds, and the mistletoe berries that sometimes grow in oak trees feed birds, robins, waxwings, and bluebirds. And insects on these feed birds. Oak moths, for example, are an amazingly important crop, if you will. And they don't damage the trees, and they do provide food for lots and lots of birds, particularly in the season when they need it most, when they're feeding young in the nest. But these are challenged, these trees, from habitat loss or degradation, from drought, from sudden oak disease and other, I'll call them exotic invasive diseases. We had these trees limbed up for about 10 to 15 feet above ground, which is a fire smart thing to do, but it also looks pretty nice. These trees are lit by lamps underneath, and they are now a lot more open to the lamps. They look beautiful at night. So it's not only the ecological importance of them, but they're pretty beautiful trees. So that's the natural part of the native habitat. This is the supplement part of it. And there are supplements that are really important. Here we have for supplements for feed eaters. And there's a lot of those. Black oil sunflower, which you can buy just about anywhere. Almost all birds will eat black oil sunflower. Grosbeaks, like the black-headed grosbeaks we have around here, like safflower, chickadees, titmice, nuthatches, and woodpeckers and wrens love nut meats. Finches like Niger. Here's a Niger feeder for our finches. And wild turkey, quail, crows, doves, and pigeons, our native pigeons, really go for some corn mixed in with some of this stuff. For things like woodpeckers, suet and bird puddings, things made of peanut butter and nut meats and fruit. And then for guys like this here, which is a hooded oriole, and this is an oriole feeder down here at the bottom. And you'll notice that what it's got in it is grape jelly. And that's what they eat. You put out one orange, that attracts them in, and then the rest of the summer you feed them grape jelly. And our neighbor has a nest tree, which is the native California palm tree, Washingtonia. That's where they nest, but they come to us for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And then, of course, here we have a hummingbird feeders, and you'll see the hummingbirds that we have there. It's not just food. If you have snags like this, see these holes here? That's where chickadees and other hole nesting birds nest. And this dead branch is actually the granary that you saw at the opening slide on this presentation. And it's really amazing how they take care of their acorns. They literally move them around. As they shrink, they move them to holes where they are tighter fitting. And they spend hours doing this. It's incredible. Leaves are really important, particularly under oak trees. That's their natural, if you will, mulch. But also it's a place where insects breed. It protects seeds and nutrients that birds eat. And it protects the oak trees that are so important to a natural habitat. And now we come to water. That's a critical resource for oil. And it's important for drinking and for bathing. If you don't have natural sources, you may have to provide a supplement for them. And that's really important if you do that to keep the water clean. So bird baths will bring them in. These are 2 bird baths that we have on our property, and they are used pretty heavily. They'll bring them in okay. And how? There were here at that day 12 cedar waxwings jumping in and out of this bird bath on our property. When they started, it was full to the brim. You can see that they have been having a heck of a lot of fun. It's everybody into the pool. And we really had a ball that day. They were here for more than an hour. But you have to be careful about this. You can get carried away with these kinds of things. So you really need to, pull yourself in. This is our little water feature, and it is in heavy use by the birds and so on. So there's also supplemental places to nest to consider. Birdhouses and bird platforms that are sturdy, that have hole sizes specific to specific species of birds that you want to attract, that are put in the appropriate height and location, and that are predator proof. And if you do try to attract these birds to nest, it's really important to keep cats indoors because the baby birds have no defense against them whatsoever. And a roaming cat can decimate a covey of quail in a very short period of time. So here's some houses. This house is a house for titmice, chickadees, Buick wrens, and so on. It's got the hole size that will attract those people. This house with a much smaller hole size is for house wrens. They're here in the summertime. And this house, we've put this out for 5 years, and at least one pair has nested in it for each of those 5 years. And here's a bluebird house. And when we talk about protecting this, you can't see it in this picture, but there's a predator guard like this on there, so squirrels can't chew away and get in at the nestlings. This is to keep raccoons from crawling up. It's an ordinary stovepipe that you can buy at any hardware store. It's very inexpensive, but it prevents predators from getting into the nest box. So these are really neat. It's important to have them. This happens to be a bluebird house or a tree swallow house or other moderate-sized bird. And but wait, if you act now, you can get 2 of them, and 2 together is better than 1. And the reason why is this: they share. And in this particular 2 houses, the tree swallows showed up first, and they took this house. Now, if that was the only house there, no other bird could use that because they would prevent it. They use the same house that a bluebird uses, and we like bluebirds. And so what you do is you put another house close by, and the bluebirds will take this house. The tree swallows will take this house. The tree swallows will protect this house against other tree swallows or violet green swallows so that it is available for the bluebirds. if the bluebirds get in first, they'll protect this house so that it's available for the tree swallows. And ornithologists have found that they actually do cooperate, that tree swallows will feed nestlings of bluebirds and vice versa, and take care of them. And together they protect against predators. So it's important, and it's really neat to have two of these houses instead of one, close together. And then if you're really, really, really interested and you don't like gophers, what you want to do is get yourself a house like this, which is a barn owl house. And here's the mama barn owl that lived in that house and has lived in that house for the last 5 years, starting usually in January, maybe early February, through about the end of May, beginning of June. She has given us, over the past 5 years, over 5 nestlings per year, and fledged 5 of them. In order to do that, she and her mate have to get about 3,000 rodents a year. And so we are very happy to have them as neighbors, because we've got a lot of gophers. And so we hope they're really, really hungry. It's a story of success. And it's really a story of success because where I come from, back in northern New York State, barn owls are an endangered species. And here they are not. And so for us to have barn owls nesting on our property, we feel truly blessed by that. So, as we say in Brooklyn, where I was born, the boys, if you build it, they will come. There are about 480 to 500 species of birds on the Marin County checklist. And 200 of those are things like ducks, shorebirds, waterbirds, waders, and so on, which you won't find in your backyard. And I'm lying about that, but you'll see in a moment why I'm lying about that. That leaves about 280 species of birds, land birds, of which about 100 to 120 are species that you might find in the area in which our habitat gardens might be located. And the rest of this presentation is going to be a few examples of this. Now, why was I lying? Well, that happens to be a common egret, and it's in our backyard. And in fact, it's working the salvia that is planted in our backyard. And what it's looking for are these guys, the western fence lizards. This is a male. He shows up 2 or 3 times a summer, and spends 2 or 3 hours every time he shows up eating these guys. And it's really amazing to see him to eat it. This is not a common yard bird. And in fact, that picture was taken without any magnification. That's how close I was able to get to this guy. So it's really interesting what you can actually attract. So nesting around our habitat are raptors, white-tailed kite, merlins, American kestrels, which are small falcons, a Cooper's hawk, red-shouldered hawk, and red-tailed hawk. And this happens to be a dark phase species of the red-tailed hawk. Most of these eat rodents. The kestrel and the kite will also, and merlin will also eat insects. The Cooper's hawk, on the other hand, comes to your feeders for the birds that come to your feeders, because the primary hunting that Cooper's hawk do are of songbirds. and that's their natural food. So we share our property with these. They nest in the trees in and around our property. And then we have our native California quail. And this is one of 3 pairs that we share their property with, because they were here long before we were. And we were fortunate enough this year that all 3 had coveys of about 8 to 15 birds. And so when they finally came together in a colony covey, there were around 40 little fuzzballs scattering around our patio, which was really a sight to see. And doves and pigeons. Here we have the mourning dove, which is common around here, and the band-tailed pigeon, which is native to this area. And what's interesting about the band-tailed pigeon is if you see a pigeon-like bird that has a yellow bill and yellow feet, even if you don't see the bandtail, you're seeing a band-tailed pigeon, because it is the only pigeon-like bird that has a yellow bill and yellow feet. And they nest in the chaparral and in the grasslands around us. This is not a native bird. It's a collared dove and a Eurasian collared dove, which has come in and made the United States its home. And what the interesting thing about it is usually when that happens, like when starlings or house sparrows come in, they take over from the native birds here and are actually detrimental to them. There has been no evidence that these do that. They have fit right into a niche and get along well with the other pigeon-like birds around here. So we have a picture here of a good person and a bad person. The good person is the barn owl. That is a female barn owl. It's one that was hurt and is in a sanctuary, but it's a beautiful, beautiful picture. That's the good guy or good lady, because they eat all the kinds of things that we don't want having, like rats and gophers and mice and voles and things like that. There's the bad guy. That is a male wild turkey. It is displaying off to this side, which you can't see in this picture, are 3 females. That's who he's displaying to. Later that summer, he came back, not looking like that, with 30 turkeys. And they were in our garden digging it up. That's why we call them a bad guy. They're not native to this area. They were brought here from the Rio Grande by actually the Fish and Game organization of the state, so that they could have a turkey hunting season. Well, unfortunately, what happened is these guys out-reproduced the hunting season and have now become a really nuisance, a really bad nuisance, particularly in open areas like we back up to. Here are some interesting birds. White-throated swifts nest here. They're only here in the summer. And they go further south into Central America. And I even think we saw some in northern South America when we were down there birding. And then we have our hummingbirds. This is our native hummingbird. It's here year-round, the Anna's hummingbird. That's a male, as you probably well know. And they are interesting birds. They are feisty, but they are beautiful, and they are the only birds that hover. Here we have a visitor. This is a rufous hummingbird. It's of the Cellepharis genus. There is another bird called the Allen's hummingbird that is looks like it. This is a male. It's feeding on hummingbird sage that we grow here. And it's on its way to Alaska. It winters down in Southern California. In fact, these birds wintered and roosted in our backyard in Orange County when we lived there. And it's on its way to, and I wasn't kidding, Alaska. This bird weighs less than a nickel. It loses half of that weight in its trip. It does that trip in 2 to 3 days. That's a few thousand miles for a bird that is teeny. It does not nest here. Its cousin, the Allen's hummingbird, does nest here. And the main difference between them in the males, you can't tell the difference between the females, is that while this bird is all rufous, the male Allen's hummingbird is rufous underneath and green on the back. So if you see a bird that's bright rufous and white underneath and green on the back, you're seeing a nesting Allen's here. This is a visitor. These guys nest in the Sierras, in the foothills, in the Sierras, and in the boreal forest up in Washington and in Oregon. And this one was passing through, or at least we thought it was passing through. I got a picture of this. We were really happy because they're quite infrequently seen here in Marin County. And it has stuck around for 2 years. Why it's not leaving, I have no idea, but it shows up regularly at the hummingbird feeders. And we just think it's cool. This teeny little bird is not much bigger than a hummingbird. It's a ruby-crowned kinglet. Don't try to really look for the ruby crown. It's very often not seen, and even when it is seen, it's just a thin streak of rubiness. This bird is not much bigger than a hummingbird, and if you see it, and if you see a small green bird hopping around in a shrub or a tree, just hopping really fast, hop, 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 almost never stopping, that you are probably seeing a ruby-crowned kinglet. They are only here in the winter, and we have 2 of them here, and they constantly are duking it out in our oak trees, where they're looking for insects. They are an insect-eating bird. We love woodpeckers. We're not so sure we love our acorn woodpeckers right now because of what they're doing to the house. But we tolerate them, and we're going to reside our house in hardy board, which will take care of that problem. But they are beautiful birds. They are colony nesters. So we probably have a colony right now of 10 to 12 birds. And they really do colony nest. The young from the original pair will help take care of the young of the year, and they are really important to gathering of the acorns. A bird that we will usually only see in the winter is this red-breasted sapsucker. It's the only sapsucker that we see regularly here in Marin County. And it's a beautiful bird. You can tell a sapsucker, well, first of all, by the fact that it's got a lot of red on its breast, well, we call it a red-breasted, but also a cap of red down the nape of its neck. But the one thing that tells a sapsucker, any sapsucker, that any birder knows from a distance is they all have this bright white stripe on the edge of their wing, and it is a definitive field mark, and you can see it from 100 yards away. If you can't see anything else on the bird and you see that, you know you've got a sapsucker. Other woodpeckers we have, these are the Nuttall's woodpecker. They're native here in Marin County. They're here year round. This is the male. It's got a little red top knot. This is the female, doesn't have a red top knot. They are called ladderback woodpeckers because if you look at their back, these white feathers going across look like a ladder. There's a whole species or genus of ladderback woodpeckers, but this is the one that we see here normally. They're really fun to watch. They're small woodpeckers, about 5 to 6 inches long. Here's another small woodpecker that's native here. These are downies. Again, the male has a little red top knot. The female doesn't have it. They are not ladderback woodpeckers. They are even smaller than the Nuttall's woodpecker. And they work the trees looking for insects and seeds. You'll find them in mixed flocks with some of the other woodpeckers and with birds that are around all the time. And then finally, a pair of woodpeckers that we only see in the wintertime. These are northern flickers or red-shafted flickers because you can just barely see underneath the tail here that it's got red feathers. The male has these red mylar stripes, the female none. A visitor in the summertime is the ash-throated flycatcher. They nest here. They nest actually mainly in West Marin. They are beautiful fly catchers, and they are told by their soft yellow belly and crest and back that's brown. Black phoebes are native here. They are here year round. And if you see a black bird that's sitting on something like this stake and bobbing its tail up and down like that incessantly, you're looking at a phoebe. All phoebes do that. And you're specifically looking at a black phoebe. Here's our ace acorn planter, scrub jay. They're actually better at it than the squirrels are because they remember where they buried the acorns, and squirrels usually do not. And they're fun birds around. They are nest robbers. They do chase other birds, but they fit in and everybody seems to put up with them okay. American crow is one of the blackbirds we have here. They have increased their population here in Marin County in the last 20 to 25 years tremendously. Christmas counts done before the turn of the century might have found a half dozen. Now they're here by the hundreds. These are the other blackbirds, large blackbirds we see. They're common ravens. And the way to tell them from each other is this. If you see a large black bird and there's only 2 of them flying, you're probably seeing a raven, particularly if these birds are sailing like a raptor might. If you're seeing a large blackbird that's flapping its wings, it's probably a crow because they can't glide, but the ravens can. And that's the way, frankly, birders tell them apart when they see them at a distance up in the sky. So here are our swallows that share our bird houses, and the tree swallows, 2 pair of tree swallows nested here this year. We had a neighbor who had violet green swallows. They're both about the same size. They differ in coloration. They're really great insect eaters. And so if you can have a house that will house some tree swallows or violet greens, do it. They'll take care of mosquitoes for you for the entire summer. And here are birds that birders call gleaners, and they travel in flocks and they are constantly looking for food, and they know how to find it. And that's why other species of birds, find them, flocks of them, and follow them around, because the titmice, the chickadee, the bush tits, and the nuthatches know where the food is. The other birds know where the food is, and so they follow them around. And these are, if we had to pick a favorite bunch of birds, it's these four and these two. We love wrens. If you see a small brown bird with a cocked up tail like that, sometimes wagging, but it's always almost straight up, like this house wren has here, or the Buick's wren. The Buick's wrens are native here and year round. They nest here. They're somewhat larger than the house wren. The house wren is here in the summertime. It nests here. And this is a male house wren. It gets here before the female does. It builds, 4 to 6 nests. And when the female shows up, they go around and they look at the nests. Just like if you are a relocated, marketing executive, and you're looking at houses, and then the wife shows up, and what happens is Harry, this will never do. This will never do. It doesn't have a big enough dining room. And that's what happens. This guy builds 4 to 6 nests. They choose one, and it's the female who chooses it. They are good pairs. They stay together. They nest for life. And they both take care of the young. Thrushes. We start with the thrushes that everybody loves. Everybody knows an American robin. They're here in the wintertime. And unfortunately, this year, I have yet to see one. So I wonder where they are. The bluebirds are here to nest in the summertime, but then they hang around. And we've had 5 or 6 bluebirds coming to our, mainly for our water here throughout the fall so far. They're beautiful birds. They have beautiful songs. They, when you hear these birds start singing, your heart just, sings along with them. And the same is true of these guys. These are our winter visitors. Swainson's thrush here, hermit thrush here. Both of them have these long, thin legs. If you see a bird on something like this with long legs that look disproportionate to the bird and that has speckled breasts, you're seeing a thrush. And if you thought robins and bluebirds sang songs that are great, these guys are even better. Unfortunately, because they're here in the winter, they don't sing when they're here. They don't nest here. They nest further north, or some of them do nest over in West Marin. Mockingbird. This is a large bird. It's told by this distinctive wing patches that open up into bright wing patches when it flies. It's a mockingbird. It has different songs. It mocks other birds. And ornithologists believe that the reason why it does that is because when birds sing, it's not that they do it for enjoyment. It's an aggressive and an assertive act. It basically says, this is my territory. It's not your territory. So get the heck out of here. This guy may have 20 songs, and he has them because he wants to keep all the birds away. And in fact, there is some significant scientific evidence that female mockingbirds pick a mockingbird male based on the repertoire of songs that he has. The more songs he has, the more he can protect the territory, the more food for them. I'm sorry to say this is not a native bird. It's the European starling. It was brought here because there was a gentleman in New York City who came here from England, and he wanted to bring a pair of every species of bird that was mentioned in Shakespeare's plays, and that included the starlings. And he brought 4. And within 20 years, there were 4 million. And they were nationwide. And they are terrible. They're bad nest robbers. They take up habitat that our native birds use and drive our native birds away. The only good thing about them is the fact that because they're an exotic invasive, if you have something that you can shoot them with, you can shoot them. And I encourage you to do that. Here are the friends that we saw earlier. That's a cedar waxwing. You'll see them at this time of year, along with robins, usually in a mixed flock with robins, looking for berries. And they are one of the reasons why your Toyon doesn't have any Christmas berries for Christmas, because they get there 2 days before you do and eat them all. And you can, it's really interesting to watch the cedar waxwings. They come in flocks. They range themselves on a branch. The one nearest the berries picks a berry, passes it down to the end, and that keeps going until everybody has had a berry. And it's really interesting to watch. If it's a very large flock, it can take a long time for them to do that. One of the warblers that we see here, sometimes year round, because of our mild climate, is the yellow-rumped warbler. There are 2 types of yellow-rumped warblers. Both have yellow rumps, but this is an Audubon's warbler. It's the western warbler. It has a yellow under its chin. The myrtle warbler has a white under its chin, and that's the main way you can tell the difference between them. We don't have as many warblers here as they do back east. And so any warbler we see is likely to be a Audubon's or myrtle warbler, because they have the largest populations here in Marin. Unfortunately, I have been unable to get a picture of a male Western tanager. So this is the female. The male is much brighter in color, bright yellow underneath, red and black on the back and on the head. And it is native to this area. You'll find them mainly in West Marin. Sometimes they come over the hills to us here in East Marin. Black-headed grosbeak. They're year-round. They're here year-round. They are large birds. This is a male, beautiful bird. And his song is just not to be believed. In fact, the way that you think about them, if you're a birder, is if you hear a bird that is singing like a robin that took singing lessons, you're hearing a black grosbeak. That's how great their song is. It is beautiful, and it just goes on and on and on and on. But remember, it's an assertive act. It's saying, get the heck out of here if you're another black-headed grosbeak. So we come to the sparrows, some of which are here year-round, some of which are only here in the winter. The dark-eyed junco, the California towhee, and the spotted towhee are year-round. They nest here, and we've got loads of them in our backyard. The golden-crowned sparrow, the white-crowned sparrow, and the fox sparrow are here only in the winter. And this guy is a skulker, which means that he hides out most of the time, as does the spotted towhee. And so you may not see him even though he's around. And then finally, the pretty boys. We have two here. The hooded oriole, this year, for some reason, our neighbor had 3 or 4 pairs nesting. And so our cup runneth over with hooded orioles, which is not a bad thing. It's really nice to see these birds. They are beautiful. This is a Bullock's oriole, much less frequently seen here in Marin County. It was at one time lumped with the Baltimore oriole. They split it, they relumped it, they split it again, and they're even now talking about relumping it. This drives us birders crazy. We have things called life lists, and when you lump them, we lose one. When you split them, we're happy because we get one. We've done it now 3 times with this guy, but he was at our jelly too, and we welcome him. That's the third year, I'm sorry, that they nested here. They don't nest in palm trees. They nest in oaks, and they nest right over here on our property, which is really great. And so the finches, last but not least, the house finch is a beautiful bird. It has a beautiful song. And if it was rare, people would travel miles to see this bird, but it's not. And so people say, oh, it's just a house finch. Well, they're beautiful. They have a great song, and we welcome them. Here, we see lesser goldfinches. We don't see, where I live in North Novato, any American goldfinches. In fact, one has shown up, and it's the first one we've seen here this year. It's the first one we've ever seen here, I should say, in 7 years. They're beautiful birds. This is a male, black top knot, black back, white wing bars, yellow underneath. And they have pretty songs too. If you see a small bird flying in a swooping way, that's a goldfinch. That's the way they fly. And in some years, we have these guys, pine siskins, streaky breast, yellow wing bars. In this picture, they are yellow, you just can't see them. They are small birds. They come to the finch feeders, and they come here in what we call an eruptive year. And that's when the seed crop fails in the northern boreal forests where they normally spend the winter. They come down here to feed. And that usually happens once every 3 to 5 years. We haven't seen them for 3 years. If you go out and if you can hear them, I cannot, but you can hear this high-pitched zzz, like a zipper, then you're hearing a pine siskin singing. And then finally, another exotic invasive, the house sparrow. We used to call these the English sparrows, but my friend who is, I worked with, who is English, said, Blighty, don't blame us. It's the damn Romans brought them in from Eurasia. So they're Roman sparrows. And he was very happy when the name changed to house sparrow. They're mainly in urban environments. We rarely see them here in the suburbs. And frankly, that's a good thing, not a bad thing. So, I really would like to ask you to help this papa out, and all the papas and mamas like him. We need more bird-friendly habitat. And so if you can even just take a 10 by 10 place in your garden and plant some of the plants that you'll get from Linda on the digital handout that I prepared, you will do wonders to help these birds make it, because they're not. In the last 20 years, over half the species of birds in North America have lost half or more of their populations. Pretty soon, we won't have anything but starlings and house sparrows. And what a sad world that will be. So remember, it all begins with the plants, and I'd love to see you plant some. Questions?
There are a few questions in the chat. One person lives in Sausalito on a hillside and wonders how he can attract bats and owls.
Bats?
Bats and owls.
Okay, well, both have houses. You can buy a bat house and you put it on the side of your house, high up, and the bats will come and live in it. My wife is constantly after me to get a bat house. We have bats living under some of our shingles. And so we know we have them. And you can buy an owl house from the Hungry Owl Project. So if you Google Hungry Owl Project and join the Hungry Owl Project, they will sell you a house. They will, for a small fee, come and clean it out at the end of the nesting season. And believe me, it will need cleaning. And they will help you site the house correctly. So the Hungry Owl Project is the place to go.
Okay, another question was, and you showed us the stovepipe, but how do you keep squirrels and rats from your feeders and the surrounding area?
Well, the same thing can keep the feeders, can keep the rodents away from the feeders. And with squirrels, you need to do a second thing. You need to place the feeder at least 8 to 10 feet from any place that they can launch themselves from, because they can jump that distance and get on your feeder. So using, let me see if I can do this. I hate to do it. If you noticed, I had in our feeders these domes over them, the plastic domes. Those are very effective because what happens when the squirrel jumps, it hits on the dome and it falls to the ground. And then if you've got one of those stovepipes or some other barrier there, it can't get up. And so it's really nice to see a squirrel that is being very frustrated by those kinds of things. It's very funny. But there are things that you can do. The most important thing that you can do about rats is to clean up under your feeders. Don't let shells or food accumulate under the feeders. Clean them up once or twice a week. It's easy to do with a rake, and that will keep the rodent population down significantly.
Okay, and what about mosquitoes in your bird baths? Do you add fresh water daily or do you prevent the mosquitoes?
I do both. Usually, particularly in the hot weather when it's dry, you have to add water every day because the birds splash it out. But I use Bacillus thuringiensis. It is the things that you get in mosquito dunks. Well, you can also buy that in a little bottle that you can add a few drops to your bird bath, and that keeps the mosquitoes down. What it does is it prevents the larvae from eating. The bacteria gets into their gut and they can no longer digest food, and so they die. It's very effective. It doesn't hurt the birds. It doesn't hurt the frogs. It doesn't hurt the fence lizards or anything else. It only kills mosquito larvae. So it's BT. Go to your garden center and ask them to show you what they've got in terms of BT for bird baths.
Okay, and someone's had a birdhouse in their yard for years, but never any birds. How do you encourage birds to use it? Does color matter?
Yeah, color matters, but not that much. Weathered wood is best. If you noticed, our bird houses are not very pretty. So the more natural it is great. But basically, the way to attract them is number one, make sure you've got the right hole size for the birds that you're trying to attract. Really small holes, 1 to 1 1/8 inch for like house wrens, 1 1/4 inches for things like chickadees and nuthatches and titmice, and 1 1/2 inches for bluebird and for tree swallows. But the best way to do it is to build a habitat around it that attracts the birds, and then they discover your birdhouse and say, "Oh, look at this! It's really nice. We can stay here." And that's the main way that you can do it.
Okay, someone sent this question in earlier. Why might birds visit your yard one year, but not the next year? Did you do something wrong?
Probably not. They're fickle. They found someplace a little bit better than yours, and somebody else who's in a place where it's not as good as yours will find yours sooner or later and show up. They get around. We don't own them. In fact, they own the land we live in. And so they show up. Some show up every year, like clockwork. We know that the second week of April, that house wren will show up and start singing, and to attract a mate. And I think it's got a calendar that it keeps. If we don't put out our Oriole feeder with the jelly in it in the first week of May, we will have orioles sitting on top of it, looking, crankily at us until we bring it out. So it's, they're beings, independent beings. Just keep trying, keep doing what you're doing. You're doing something right because they did show up, and others will show up again if you continue doing it.
Well, I want to thank you all very much for attending, and thank you, Bob, for a great and informative lecture. I will send out the plant list and to everyone, and also this will be recorded, has been recorded, and in about a week to 10 days, it'll be on the Marin County Free Library website. And when I send out the handout, I'll send out the link to the recording. Thank you all very, very much for coming, and especially thank you to Bob for all the great information.
I'd like to add my thanks for you coming, and I'm sorry we ran a little bit over, but I'm glad you stuck with me.
We had a lot of great information. Thank you all. Have a happy Thanksgiving, and everybody take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.